I have had to send out emails to students and say, you haven't been here since January. It's time to withdraw from the class. Take it another semester. Sorry, things aren't working out. And I've had those students email me right back. I'm not going to quit. I'll be there. And then they miss again. Okay. This is fun. All right. We're gonna make it. Hi, Jesse.
Hey, how goes it?
We're doing all right. Our numbers are few, but we're surviving.
Well, I'm there in spirit.
Thank you. Hello, Colby. Welcome to class. All right, looks like it's 1 o'clock. Let's. All right, since we're reading Martin Luther King Jr. today, Roll's question is about race. How do you respond to arguments about race? Go ahead and write for a few minutes. Sorry. You're all right. But in this semester, you can't blame parking for being bad, right?
No, I actually was walking for, make me walk for 30 seconds. The first
So
row, I think,
far.
didn't have the post.
All right, you can finish up what you're writing. I'll read those individually. I won't have us share them right now. What we want to do is, today we're reading Martin Luther King Jr., and we're going to lean on his expertise and his experience and his rhetoric to help us kind of build our ability to talk about and respond to arguments about race. I'm guessing Martin Luther King Jr. is one of those writers that you actually knew before you took my class. Am I right?
Yeah.
How much did you know about King before you read the essay? What do you bring to the discussion already?
He's a civil rights
Civil rights activist, yes. Third grade understanding of, is that big or is that small? That's shaky.
I grew up in a small town.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah. I don't remember learning anything about him until maybe, 7th or 8th grade. I had an 8th grade history teacher who would play the I Have a Dream speech over the loudspeaker every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I guess that'll tell you something about Idaho, is that when I was a kid, you did not get Martin Luther King Jr. Day off from school. You still went to school. I mean, now it's a recognized holiday, but Idaho wasn't recognizing it as a holiday, at least when I was a kid. Oh, it still doesn't recognize it as a holiday. Well, we get the day off from school, though. My kids did. Are you in this town? Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so maybe city by city. Yeah, but the I Have a Dream speech is probably the one that most people are familiar with. Does that sound right or familiar? Had anyone read this particular essay before? Okay, all right. A couple of people in the other classes had.
I had read it, but it had been a really long time.
Okay. Good. So some more exposure, just maybe depending on your school experience growing up. And yeah, I'll point out we have half a street named after him here. It's just the section of street that's on campus. We have Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and then Cesar Chavez Boulevard, but it's just a half a block in each direction, just out in front of our buildings. So as we read this essay, we're going to ask the same questions we're asking of all of our arguments. What does the writer want us to think, do, or believe by the end of the essay? And how does the writer persuade? Right, and that's a look at what rhetorical strategies are at work. The basic being, ethos, pathos, logos. And I'll point out, right, that there's a wonderful variety of combinations. And then occasionally we'll see some things in there that we think are persuasive, but that we don't exactly have a label for. And that's okay too. We can always bring those up just as a matter of question, and say, I'm not sure if this is one or the other. Now, I would say ethos, pathos, logos, identifying strategies was one of the strengths on the midterm exam. I think it's something that our class did well. So you can enter this with some confidence. Logs, thanks once again to my typos. There we go. All right. So it's okay for us to jump around in this conversation as we kind of sort things out. I'll recognize this is a very long essay. It's probably one of the longest that we read this semester. And because of its length, it's complicated, right? There's a lot going on. And so even if you read it all an hour ago before class, the answers won't immediately come to your head as we're talking about it. But feel free to jump in with comments, with observations, with questions. We will not analyze every part of this essay out loud in class today. We just can't. But if there's something that I don't get to, but you think it's worth it, raise your hand and say, hey, can we take a look at whatever page? And let's look at something up close. But go ahead and turn to page 220. And we'll just start with rereading a couple of paragraphs and making some specific observations. I'll point out a couple of things. Number one, the essay was written in 1963. All right, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Number two, the King had a very specific audience in mind when he wrote the essay. The specific audience is, number one, the intro will tell us, and his opening line will tell us, he was writing to a group of clergymen. So that's a group of 8 men who were leaders of local religious congregations in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. So he is writing directly to these men. But it is more complicated than that, as it often is with writing. So King was from Atlanta, Georgia. He was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, and he wrote the letter from jail in Birmingham, Alabama. So, it's called Letter from Birmingham Jail because he literally did write at least portions of it while imprisoned. While he was there, he read the local newspaper, and the local newspaper had, letter to the editor, comment on recent news events, and these 8 clergymen had written a letter criticizing King. So his letter is a response, in part, it's a response to these specific 8 clergymen in Alabama at the time. However, he also knew that this was a national issue. And so when the letter was published, and he did make a deliberate effort to publish it nationally, and it was published in the Atlantic Monthly, that's one of America's oldest magazines, still in print, and the New York Post, right? So there's the broad audience as well. The American public, right? So general. So we want to kind of keep in mind both the general and specific audiences as we read. And this is a really complicated sort of idea, but we'll see him address both in different ways. And I'll just remind you that in 1963, so, we know Martin Luther King Jr. as a civil rights activist. You may know him as a hero. You may have seen a monument to him in Washington, D.C. You've seen streets named after him. At the time, he was not world famous. He was not well loved. He might have been, he was known, but people didn't go, oh, that's the civil rights hero. They would have said, I don't know about him yet. Or they might have had other very, very specific opinions about him. So we kind of had to let go of the 3rd grade version we know of to read this letter in context. And that's to think, here's a person who, as far as we know, is a guy who got arrested in Alabama, right? So that's where we're reading from. So I'll start on page 220. I'll read a little bit and then I'll pause to say, do you notice any rhetorical strategies at work? All right. Letter from Birmingham Jail. My dear fellow clergymen. Pause. All right. Do you see any rhetorical strategies at work?
Addressing them?
Yes. What about that? What about how he's addressing them?
Directly with kindness.
Very good. Yes. It's a polite way to address people. Is that ethos, pathos, logos, something else?
I believe it would be pathos.
Sure. Yeah. Pathos, right? Emotion.
Yeah.
If you're being polite, what kind of emotions are you going to generate? Oh, yeah, some kindness between us. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. Anything else? Any other rhetorical? I'm recognizing that we're looking at very few words there. But I think there is something else. Yeah, go ahead.
Would when he said fellow be part of it?
Yeah, keep going.
He's like saying he's the same as them. And you said they're criticizing him, so he's lumping himself together with them.
Good, yeah. By saying fellow clergyman, he's putting him in their group, which is a bold move, right? If they were criticizing him, you're a clergyman. Yeah, I'm a clergyman too. Look at us, right? Yeah. So putting himself in the same group is ethos, pathos, logos. What do you think?
Ethos?
Why ethos?
Honestly, I can't remember the definition of it.
So ethos is an appeal to credibility, character,
Authority.
authority.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's ethos.
Do you want to explain that any further?
Well, I mean, he's addressing them with respect,
Yeah.
yes, but he's putting himself at their level, their authority.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. It's as simple as that. So like, we call him Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's also Reverend. So he's Dr. Reverend Martin. He's got many titles. But on one level, right, his doctorate, he studied, I think it's a doctorate of divinity. He studied religion in college, but he's also a congregational leader, right? He's got a church that he looks after, that he preaches at. So my dear fellow clergyman is like, hey, I'm in prison. You've been criticizing me. And he's like, hello, my fellow clergyman. He puts himself on the level with them like, I'm one of you. Yeah, very good. And that's an important thing. We'll continue to address this because the question we want to have in the back of our mind is how much ethos, how much credibility, believability does a person have when they're in prison? All right, you can think about that for a second here. While confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. The quotation marks, that's from their letter. He's quoting their letter to them. Unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. All right, good. What other appeals do we see now? Or what appeals do we see at work in that first major paragraph? David, do you have any insight there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm reading it off of my computer as well, so it takes me a second to get back and forth.
Oh, all right.
Because you don't know if I have any more insights. I guess we talked about it a little bit, like he's putting himself on that level, and then he's also like getting ready to wreck them. So he like wants to be kind, so he's using like.
Yeah, we do see some more politeness there, right?
Yeah.
When he says
down, like we know what's coming. Okay,
good. Yeah, and when he calls him, you are men of genuine goodwill, right? He's being very polite to them. Yeah, so in part it is preparation to wreck them. Again, it's building that good feeling. What else, Jared?
It's almost like kill with kindness.
Sure, yeah. Good. Yeah, that could be one of his strategies. Good. Jesse, did you just go
Yeah,
off?
I think there's some logos there for sure. I mean, he's like, let's be reasonable. If I had to address every single thing, like nobody would have any time.
Yeah, good, right? So yeah, there's logos there, and I think it's done with some irony, right? He said, well, if I paused to answer every criticism that came across my desk, I wouldn't have any free time. And we're like, yeah, that sounds reasonable, but we can kind of laugh at that, right? And we're like, oh, wait a second. He must get a lot of criticism, right? And then we think, hey, wait a second. He's too busy to answer criticism, but he's going to answer my criticism. Again, now we've gone from like my fellow clergyman to like, hey, maybe I'm up here, right? He's raised himself up a little, say like, I'm a busy guy, but I'll answer your letter. And now, and not only that, he says, right, my secretaries, plural secretaries, wouldn't even have time to answer all of this, but I'm going to answer your letter personally, right? So now he's very important, and that's a good observation to make. And then we see him just say patient and reasonable terms, pathos, logos, patient, reasonable, right? He says, I'm going to try to do both of those things. All right, so now we're moving on to the second major paragraph. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. And again, he's quoting them, right? I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every Southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. All right, so within their letter against him, they've said, look, you're from Georgia, we're from Birmingham. Birmingham will solve Birmingham's problems. Georgia can solve Georgia's problems. You're an outsider, don't come here. So he's got to address that issue, right? So it's still a problem of ethos. Like, what authority do you have to come to my town and try to fix problems in my town, right? Imagine if Pocatello were having a local political issue and somebody came from Wyoming and said, hey, here's what we're going to do, and we'll solve problems this way. We'd all turn and say, what are you doing here? You're not from here, right? So how does he attempt to overcome that issue? What's the argument that he's making? What appeals do you see? And just within that paragraph, what are some of your observations?
It says that he was invited there.
Good. So number one, like, what are you doing here? I was invited here. Like, oh, okay. Right. There's a good reason, right? Yeah. Good. What else? Colby, can I call on you?
Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay. From if I'm being honest, I think like this sorry, this paragraph like was it gave me it was very like weirdly emotional in my opinion. I feel like he was just like I was expressing his anger and like what gives you the right, you know?
Yeah.
I don't remember which is it ethos that gives off the emotional or pathos. I always mix them up. I'm sorry.
Pathos is emotion. Yeah. So
Okay.
pathos, think pathetic, think emotion.
But I
Yeah.
also think it gives a little logic too. Like what gives you like, does that kind of make sense? So I think it's kind of a mixture in my opinion, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay, good. So, so observation number one, we have some emotion, some heat in this, right? Where it's like, why are you here? What gives you the right? He's like, let me tell you what gives me the right. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that's in the repetition at the end. I am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. The repetition might give it some of that emotional drive. And then you're right, logic, right? Back to the, what are you doing here? I was invited. Well, that's a logical reason to come if you were invited. Yeah, good, thank you. And then again, ethos, right? He's like, oh, well, I'm the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Organization. Oh, they're in every single Southern state. Right? So I'm president of this huge organization, and we have a chapter here in your city, and they invited me. So logic, authority, emotion, they're all at work. And then just notice just his use of language that is kind of interesting and beautiful. I don't know if it has a specific, but just the repetition of the words, I am here, in the last two sentences in a couple of varieties. Repetition is one of King's tools that you'll see him use throughout that gives his language, I don't know, makes it really memorable, makes
Would
it
you
really,
say he's just trying to drive his point home with constantly reaffirming them like, hey, this is why I'm here?
Yes, good. Was that William?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I think that's a good observation. So yeah, reaffirmation, reaffirming.
It's like if you don't understand the reason, I'm going to tell you in several different ways so you can understand one of them, pick and choose from which one you understand the best. But I shouldn't be in jail because I was invited here, but here's 3 reasons why I'm here. I was invited. I'm the president of this chapter of these 85 affiliations that with the Christianic movement. Like, he's just driving his point home. Yeah, good observation. All right, I'm going to move to the next paragraph. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus
and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. All right, so biblical references there, right? Biblical allusions. So if we are looking at his specific audience here, why is he quoting the Bible? How does it affect his readers?
Because didn't you say that clergymen have to do with the church?
Yeah. So these are leaders of religious groups. What's their commonality?
He's comparing himself to a prophet or whatever they were, apostles.
Yes. Two comparisons. So I'll point out, and the book, I know this because of the book tells us that his clergymen are, it says 8 of the 11 clergymen: Catholic, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, and Jewish. So he's got a wide variety. So shared belief in the Bible, or at least parts of the Bible, right? The Jewish congregation will at least have the Old Testament in common, and the different Christian groups will have the New Testament in common as well. So when he says, well, you say you don't like outsiders coming in, why am I here? Well, you know that book that we all believe in, the Bible? There were prophets who would leave their hometown to share their message. And now we're like, now if we're in those clergymen, right, we're like, oh, okay, yeah, right. Well, is it okay for them to leave their hometown to go to another town to share their message? Well, yeah. So he's making a comparison, right? And if the comparison works, then we have to let him go, right? Now, Paul, he's from the New Testament, an important figure from the New Testament. Do you know any details about Paul? And it's okay if you don't.
Paul brought the gospel to the Gentiles, right?
Yes. That's
so he's
part,
like,
right?
I know that's what I was thinking about, is like, he's trying to like open up people's minds, whereas Paul did the same thing. So he's trying to make that comparison.
Yeah, so in this case, Gentiles would be like the people from other belief systems, people from other nations, right?
Yeah.
So again, right, like if the criticism against King is, you're not from here, go back home, and he's like, well, Paul went to other nations to share his message, right? Good, and Paul is credited with writing much of the New Testament of the Bible, and they're very often called the epistles of Paul, which means the letters of Paul. So Paul communicated through letters, and several of them were written while Paul was in prison. So, and now we may not know that, but the 8 clergymen know that, right? They're aware that Paul is this figure who was arrested for his beliefs. Paul is a person who wrote letters to people in other towns. He was an outsider coming in. So now, right, we're still looking at the questions of ethos. And so I'd ask you to think about that idea of how much ethos, how much credibility, believability does someone in prison have? Now, if we were just like thinking about ourselves today, and I said, hey, somebody in the prison has written us a letter, let's take a look at it. How much credibility, believability are we ready to give somebody who's in prison? Yeah, probably not a lot. We're going to already be prejudiced in some form. We're like, well, you know, that's somebody who's broken some law. I don't have to listen to somebody who's not following the rules, right? So not a whole lot of credibility. Now, King is trying to gain credibility. So one of the ways he does it here is like, if he can compare himself to Paul, right? And if they can go, yeah, Paul did that, right? Paul was in jail. Yeah, Paul wrote letters from jail. Paul took his message to people in other nations. Then what happens to King's credibility? Well, if the comparison is successful, right, these clergymen, and again, right, this is why it's so important to recognize a specific audience there. Because, quoting the Bible does not immediately give you credibility, right? It does with certain audiences. And so that's what he's working at there. Good. Those are the big observations from that paragraph. Anything else from that paragraph? All right, let me read the next one. He says, moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. All right, what types of appeal do we see at work? There. Anything new, anything old?
He's using big words. He sounds very articulate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, beautiful language there. The cognizant of the interrelatedness, right? Like the message there is we're all connected, right? That's the simple version, you know, but he repeats that message several times in several different phrases. So yeah, big words and then kind of lovely metaphors with the, you know, we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Just think like we're all the fabric of the same shirt. You pull a thread here, the fabric moves over here. Somebody pulled a thread. That's why I'm here. So yeah, and that builds up his ethos, right? Like when we see like, ooh, this guy's good with words, right? But we also have, now this is probably the most quoted line from the essay, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now that's an argument, right? That's an argument that we have to analyze logically. We have to say, well, you know, is that true? Is injustice in Birmingham a threat to justice in Georgia? You're nodding your head. Why do we find that persuasive?
Because if there's a case somewhere that something wrong is happening, then everyone's going to go, well, why do I have to follow the rules? It's like if I
Okay.
get one kid candy, the other one's going to go, where's mine?
Yeah. All right. Good. I like the parrot metaphors. Yes. Yeah. Good. Any other comments or responses to the injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? So this becomes an important political argument, right? And it's a political argument that's still important and still hot today because it's still part of just the basic conflict among political parties, right? Because the clergymen who King is writing to are not against civil rights. They're pro-civil rights. So, you know, if we're asking them like, hey, are you guys racist? Do you think that black people should have the same rights as white people? They would say, no, we're not racist. And yes, black people should have the same rights. However, their response to King was, wait, be patient. It's going to change, but it'll change slowly. Or their response was, yes, you deserve civil rights, but don't break the law. And King is making an argument against them. And it's not that they disagree on the end goal, right? But they're like, look, you're not from here. We'll solve these problems. You solve those problems. And King says, nope. If there's a problem here, it's also a problem there. I'm here to help fix that problem. And that may be where people still kind of disagree politically, right? Like on what level of government do problems need to be solved? And that's part of the issue that's going on here. But King is going to argue that it's deeper or more problematic than that. Let's skip a couple of pages and read another paragraph. Page 224. There is a paragraph that starts, we have waited more than 340 years. So David, if you're looking at the online version, scroll down to that paragraph. We have waited more than 340 years. And anyone else online, I don't know. All right, so I'm gonna read this one. It's a long paragraph and I'm gonna stop and interrupt myself. But again, we're still looking for types of appeal that are at work. He says, so remember the clergymen are saying, we believe in civil rights to wait. He says, we have waited more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt this stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. Now, make a note in your margin here, like a little pencil mark or something. Okay, because this next sentence is a big deal. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored, when your first name becomes the N-word, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. Period. All right, make another note in the margin. That was one sentence from the word but to the word wait. And you can notice too that the word wait comes right before the other word, so it's wait to wait. What's going on in that sentence? Why is that one gigantic sentence? What's he doing?
Listing all the problems or a lot of problems they go through. So
Yeah.
Show like how bad it is.
Good. So on one level, it's a list. What's a list of? It's a list of some of the problems that he's personally encountered. And then you said the other thing you said was, oh, okay, yeah, another good idea. Good. Okay, good. Other observations? What's going on in that list, that sentence?
I mean, he basically smacks them across the face with evidence.
Yeah,
His experience.
On one level, like we could say, if they're saying, well, why can't you wait? He gives a list of reasons why. So here's reasons, right? And those are personal ones. Like these are things he's actually had to do. Yeah, very good. So yeah, list, evidence, reasons. What else, Jared?
He's trying to make them feel the hate that they feel.
Yes.
Walk in their shoes, so to say.
Yeah, good. Yeah, put them into he's like, well, why can't I wait? Well, here, let me tell you what I had to tell to my children the other day. Then maybe they can empathize. So there is a pathos on a couple of levels. Pathos, like Jesse says, a slap across the face. Pathos, as Jared's recognizing too, that like, well, here, look at it from my point of view. Yeah, very good. Good. Any other? Yeah, it's a rich and complicated sentence. It's one of those that, like grammatically, it's beautiful and well done. Emotionally, it's terrible. That's a very difficult list of things to experience. And it's beautifully written. I mean, just the fact that like he's got the words wait on either end. And then if you notice too, did you notice the alliteration? Doing it in a very different way than Annie Dillard, right? But we have vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers and brothers at will and whim, curse, kick, and kill.
Speech stammering as you seek.
Yeah, you speech and then tongue twisted. So we have all this alliteration. We're like, well, he's like pausing, like, how can I make this list of ugly things really also beautiful? I don't know if it's conscious or unconscious there, but there's some language in there, wordplay that makes the sentence rich on all sorts of levels. Yeah. Let me finish his paragraph. He says, there comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. And there may be some understatement, some irony there. So King is constantly working with ethos, pathos, and logos. For me, it's really hard to separate them because, he builds up his credibility at the same time that he's kind of punching us emotionally. And at the same time that we're like, oh, if the question was, why can't you wait for civil rights? We have a list of reasons. And then just go back to the beginning of that paragraph. He says, we have waited more than 340 years. He's like, well, what's the right time to wait? And then we begin to and here, how does he persuade, right? How does he get us to start to go like, oh, okay, I might be on the wrong side of this issue, right? If we're these clergymen who are criticizing them. Let's go to our original question, just the question of thesis. What is the big idea that King is trying to get his audience to think, do, or believe?
That they deserve equal rights right now. No more.
Okay, so Black Americans deserve equal rights. Now, did you have another detail in there?
I said right now.
Oh, right now, yeah.
Yeah, like emphasis on the right now.
Yeah, good. The weight part is the problem, right? Because in the end, remember, big picture, these clergymen are not against the civil rights, but they are against the now part, or at least they're not actively helping the now part. Good. All right, now that's part of it. Now there's another part. There's a complication, a twist. Anyone want to add to this? What's the complication or the twist to the argument? So that's part of it. Black Americans deserve equal rights. Now, the next part is kind of the how. And here's here's the part that the clergymen really disagree with. Go ahead.
Is it that he wants to help do it? He wants to be a part of it?
Yeah, but it's a question of the way he wants to be a part of it. So I'll just add. So remember, King is in prison. Does anyone know why he was arrested?
For parading without a permit.
Parading without a permit is the official law that he broke, right? Now here's kind of the tricky part, right? So parading without a permit means marching down the street, right? Now we know that the Constitution gives people the right to assemble, right? So you can gather. And it gives people freedom of speech, so you can speak your mind, even if it's disagreeable to some, right? But here's where again, federal versus local, right? That's the Constitution. The local law said, yes, you can, but first you have to get a permit. And when Martin Luther King Jr. and company said, can we have a permit? Alabama said, no, or Birmingham. And so King broke the law. So he really did break the law, right? So he's arrested, he broke the law, so and here's the tricky part of the argument, right, is he's arguing that it's okay to break the law. And that's where these clergymen are upset with him. That they say, well, you broke the law, you can't break the law. Don't come to our town and break the law. Right? Even if it's for a good reason, don't break the law. Now, he's going to give us a list of conditions. Martin Luther King Jr. is not arguing, hey, everybody go break the law whenever you want, right? He's got some specific conditions. So, part one of the thesis, Black Americans deserve equal rights now. Part two of the thesis, in order to do that, we're going to break the law. And then part of the reason why this essay is so long is hold on, let me explain. Here is the how, when, where, and why of breaking the law. So what follows is a list, or at least a set of conditions. So what do you remember about King's lengthy argument about breaking the law? When is it okay to break the law? Why is it okay to break the law? You said something and then over here.
A law that does not follow a moral code.
Yeah. So what kind, we don't break all laws, we break the laws that don't follow moral codes, right? Yeah. Good. And because that one's complicated, he also goes into some sets and conditions, right? He'll say, you know, there's right versus wrong, but there's also legal versus illegal. They're not always the same. And then he'll tell us that a moral law is one that matches with God's law, right? And then he'll say, well, and how do we know that? And then he'll say, a good law uplifts people. So yeah, that was good. Yeah, very good. And what else?
Is that the same as like the just and unjust?
Well, I think that's where we're moving from like his specific audience of religious leaders and then his broader audience of America in general. So I think just versus unjust, right? Is the other, because, I mean, this is the problem. You still see people arguing, you know, like, well, can't we use the Bible for law? And people are like, no, because not everybody believes in the Bible, right? So just versus unjust, right? And that's where he'll get us a set of conditions like, how is the law applied, right? Is the law applied to all people equally? Is it applied to one group but not another, right? Then we have an unjust law, right? Because he says you can have a good law, but if only some people are required to obey it, then that's an unjust application of the law, right? And so now, like, he can kind of put religion to the side for a minute and just talk about the law enforcement generally, right? And so I do think it is a separate condition because he's got to kind of move from the religious audience who he can appeal to the Bible, he can appeal to religious authority, and then kind of the broader American audience who might say, we've got to put religion aside and just talk about law. And so, yeah, good. I think that is another, like a separate kind of question or issue, yeah. So unjust law versus a just law. How is the law applied? Who's expected to obey it? Is one group punished more than another for breaking that law? These are still important issues as we look at, you know, the questions of law and race in America. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Other rules and conditions, right? He's telling us it's okay to break the law, but we've got a few more kind of caveats, a few more footnotes that we want to attach to this. Any more details that you remember? Folks at home, any more details that you remember about how do people know when it's okay to break the law?
You mentioned laws that only apply to certain people, but also the fact that those people didn't have the ability to vote on them or not.
Good, yes. Who participated in making the law, right? So is one group of people who did not get to participate in making the law expected to obey the law that the other group of people made? Yeah. And I mean, this is historically, this is a very American argument, right? That's part of the revolution, was the question of like representation, right? Yeah, somebody in England can't make laws for people living in America, and now they're like, well, okay. Can a group of white men living in Washington make a law for a group of black men living in Alabama to obey? And why don't they have to obey? Yeah, so who participated is another important question. Good. All right, so I'll add a couple more conditions. He will say, if you're going to break the law, do it non-violently. He says you must, and this is where he says, you must prepare yourself spiritually, get ready to be kicked, get ready to be hit, get ready to turn the other cheek, get ready to be bit by a dog, and to do nothing about it. So yeah, so for King, non-violence is key. He says, accept the consequences. And he says, do it openly. Now, these are some interesting and confusing things, but they're tactics. They're part of protest tactics, right? So he's saying, oh no, if you're going to break the law, get ready for the consequences, which means getting arrested or getting, hit, kicked, or abused in some form. Do it openly, right? You don't secretly break the law. So if you're going to break the law, you have to do it on purpose and purposely get caught. Now, this is part of a tactic. Why? What's going on? Why is this a strategy? And he's not the first one to do it. He's actually leaning on some people who've done it before him.
It's a strategy because if you don't get caught, if it's not in the open, what kind of impact does that make on the bigger subject?
Yeah, good. It is about impact, right? It's done to bring about change. Yeah, good. Thank you, Jesse. And what else, Brody?
People are more likely to accept what you're protesting for if you're not doing it like violently and destructively.
Yeah, good. So it is a question of like audience, right? Who's watching you and how are they going to react to it? Yeah, good. And so, that's, he deals with this, some of the issues of this on page 225. Halfway, this is right after the paragraph I just finished. He says, you express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. He's like, yeah, that's a good reason to worry. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court decision of 1954, outlining segregation in public schools, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others, right? He says, people watching this are going to be confused. They're like, hey, wait a second. Are we breaking a law or disobeying law or obeying law? Because he says in 1954, civil rights activists, right? So the law said segregation, right? Black people and white people had to be separated, but they'd be equal, separate, but equal was the law. So this was challenged. Brown versus the Board of Education went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court investigated the schools and they said, separate is not equal, bring everybody together. And again, like federal government versus local government, the local are like, no, we're not going to do that. So they didn't. So then they had to go around and individually sue school districts to force them to integrate. And this took a long time. It wasn't immediate, right? Like you don't just pass a law and suddenly people are like, okay, now we'll fix it. So they individually are suing the school. So he's like, okay, so in 1954, we were trying to force everybody to obey the law. And now in 1963, we're breaking the law. That probably looks bad, right? And he's recognizing it. And so, yeah, it's as Brody pointed out, like there's people who are going to say, can we have it both ways? And he's like, yes, right? And it's back to this issue of legal and illegal and right and wrong. And he's going to tell us that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. And just because something is illegal doesn't mean it's wrong. And his example is he jumps to Hitler, right? He goes to the Hitler example. He does everything that you've always been told not to do. Like, what about Hitler? And then he compares himself to Jesus. So yeah, with Hitler, he'll say, everything Hitler did was legal. He passed laws making things he did legal. And he says, but even though it was illegal to help Jewish people in Germany, I would have done it, right? Now remember, he's got Jews in his audience. And so he's got people who are like, well, yeah, I agree, totally agree, right? So if he can get them to go, yeah, you're right, not everything that's legal is good or correct, then he's got these people who are now saying, yeah, I guess it's okay to break the law sometimes, right? Good, all right, let's see. Oh yeah, we were talking about non-violently, accepting the consequences, doing it openly, right? The end goal is to change the situation. Do you know historically of other people who are engaging in this sort of action, breaking the law openly, non-violently, getting arrested?
Women, when they're advocating for
Yeah.
women's rights.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so in part, some of the different women's rights movements, attempting to get the right to vote, among other things. Yeah, good. Gandhi engaged in this sort of campaign when in India, right? So people in India protesting British law, British rule over India. Gandhi would get himself arrested, and non-violently. And one of the goals is just fill up the prisons. They're like, okay, fine, put us in jail, but let's get a whole bunch of people in jail. King did the same thing, right? When When hundreds and hundreds of people are arrested and the jails are full, then they have to go, okay, how do we handle this situation? And then there's a single person who did it in the previous century. Do you know of Henry Thoreau's story? Henry Thoreau, the writer, not as well known. He wrote an essay called Civil Disobedience. So in the 1840s, Henry Thoreau, America started a war with Mexico to take over California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And this war to gain land would increase slavery, right? All of these states would all enter the United States as slave-holding states. And there was a tax to raise money for the war, and Thoreau refused to pay it because he was anti-slavery. And so he's like, I'm refusing to pay the tax because I don't think we should do this. It's bad. And they're like, we'll get arrested for it. And he said, good. He went to jail. While in jail, he wrote an essay talking about the morality of breaking the law. So civil disobedience is generally what this is called. And you'll still see people doing it today for different causes. Sometimes civil rights causes, sometimes environmental causes. The idea is break the law openly, non-violently, get a large group of people arrested, get that audience to watch so that they can say, wait a second, what's the right thing to do here, right? So there's a lot of what's going on here with King. Now, I'm going to ask you another question that might be kind of complicated. So I'm going to say, are you persuaded? I am not asking you to confess to having broken any laws, but let's just talk about this general idea of, is it okay to break the law if the law is unjust or immoral? Does King persuade you? Why not? What do you think? What do you think of this idea?
Yeah, because he gives like specific examples and shows the reasoning behind why they did it.
Okay.
You're just gonna like break the law for no reason, then no, but if you have a solid reason, then yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. Good, other reactions, other responses? Do you find it persuasive? Why not? So Bertie was liking the examples, the reasoning behind it, it was clear.
And another thing to add on to that, maybe not have that be your first approach, because he said
Yeah, oh yeah.
50 years or 357. So maybe not like jump right to it, but eventually something's gonna break either way. So
yeah, and he actually does mention this, right? He says try other methods first, right? Petition to change the law. Yeah, he's not saying don't use the legislature. He's saying, well, we tried that, but it's been a long time. Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Other reactions, other ideas? Do you find it persuasive? Why not? Jesse, are you?
I'm totally persuaded. I mean, it's pretty huge. I mean, he's comparing it to Hitler and many other examples. The evidence that he supports breaking the law with is irrefutable.
Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, now here's the interesting thing, right? Like within the essay, he argues against moderation, against moderates, right? He specifically attacks who he calls the white moderates in the essay. Was this part clear? Like, why is he attacking moderation? Why are moderates part of his target?
They don't like get anything done. They kind of just sit back and like wait either way. They don't necessarily like argue either way. They're just kind of like, oh, we'll see how it goes. Yeah,
good. And so he's dealing with the label of extremist. They're like, oh, you're an extremist. And he didn't think of himself as an extremist. He's like, I'm not an extremist. I just want civil rights. Why is that extreme? And then by the end of the essay, he's like, you're right. I'm an extremist because if moderation means sitting there and waiting, I don't want to sit around and wait. So again, like it's a group of people who presumably are on his side, right? They're not racist. They're not anti-civil rights, but they're also not joining in. They're not helping. And so his criticism of the clergyman is that, sitting around and doing nothing is more confusing. He says, I like the Ku Klux Klan, not because I like their ideas, but I know what side they're on, right? And he knows the Ku Klux Klan is openly racist and attacking, but he says, at least I don't have to guess what they think. But so, and that's his attack on his clergyman is like, I have to guess what you think. You say you're on my side, but you do nothing. And that's confusing. So that's where he'll say, fine, I'm an extremist. But you know who else was an extremist? Jesus was. And that's the comparison he makes there. All right, let's go to the end of his letter here. I'll read the last 3 paragraphs, page 237. He says, never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it was much too long to take your precious time. Now, I probably could read that a dozen different ways. I might say, I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time, right? It could be sarcastic. Maybe he is just being polite like we saw at the beginning. Maybe it's both at the same time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I'd been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? And we get maybe some empathy here. We have some more emotion. We're like, okay, yeah, that's bad. If I've said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. So you can see again, like ethos at work, where he's like, I'm confident in what I said, but if I've said anything wrong, please forgive me. But if I lie, well, I beg God to forgive me. I don't care about you, right? Look, so appeal to the ultimate authority there is part of what he's doing. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman. We're back to that opening line, right? And as a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. And then he signs the letter. So I think you can see, again, like a variety of appeals at work there, him trying to be uplifting and positive at the end, building a connection with his audience. Any other observations, questions, things we didn't address but that you noticed? Oh yeah, I think there's some sarcasm in there. And it, like when it's on paper, it's hard to, I'd love to hear him read it, to hear how much sarcasm or snark there is in there. But I think he's snarky, but he's honest at the same time, where we're like, I think he really means like the brotherhood, like he really wants to be on the same side, but he's also like, thanks a lot, you guys, digging at him. All right, good. Let's take a look at your next major assignment. All right, so I'm going to switch screens here now and go to, this document, this PDF is found on Moodle. It's up with all your other assignments. Here's essay 3. This is just, I made it visible today. So this is your next major project. It's worth 100 points. The simple instructions are analyze an argument. So far, we've had 2. We've had the Notre Dame essay and King. We'll just keep adding a few more as we go. The goals of your essay are to, 1, clearly, accurately, and fairly summarize an argumentative essay from our reading assignments. 2, formally analyze the argument that the essay makes, and that includes support your analysis with carefully chosen examples in MLA format. And number 3, formally respond to the argument. You'll actually have 3 separate sections on the paper: summary, analysis, and response. So the simple instructions, 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins, 3 to 4 pages, 1,000 words, a little longer than the others, double spaced. Page numbers in the last name in the upper right-hand corner of all pages. Name, the date, and the course in the upper left-hand corner of the first page. Divide your essay into 3 main parts: summary, analysis, and response. Label these parts in bold. All right, now here's the specific instructions for each section. Summary. In the summary section, use your own words to introduce and summarize the essay that you've chosen, about 1 to 1.5 pages. And when I say introduce it, pretend like you're writing to somebody who didn't take our class. So somebody who's never heard of the essay. So you don't just say, oh, we've all read Martin Luther King Jr., his essay's great. You're like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're saying, in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote Letter from Birmingham Jail. In his essay, he argues for racial equality. He argues that it's okay to break the law when law is applied unjustly to people of different racial groups. Right? So we're explaining it with our own words. We're not being, let's see. Well, here, I'll just finish. Do use original word choice and sentence structure. Present all of the author's main ideas. Be fair, be thorough, be objective. So don't give me your own opinion or ideas in the summary. Just repeat the author's big ideas in your own words. Analysis. All right, so what I'm having you do is separate, 3 different activities, 3 different sections. So we're kind of just taking on one thing at a time. In the analysis section, analyze the presentation of the argument of the essay you've chosen, about 2 pages, a little bit more. This is the most important section of the paper. Identify the writer's thesis, identify support for the thesis, discuss how the author attempts to persuade an audience, consider different types of appeal and how they work with the purpose, the audience, or the author's credibility, consider the writing strategies at work, provide examples in the form of quotations, introduce each quotation, discuss each quotation, show how the information in the quotation leads readers to understand the text the way that you explain. So the analysis section, you'll have to leave stuff out. You'll have to narrow it down and focus. So if you were analyzing King, you might just say, I'm only going to look at emotional appeal. And then you say, in his essay, Martin Luther King Jr. attempts to persuade readers through the use of emotional appeal. And then give me lots of different examples of emotional appeal. And that's all you have to do, right? Or you might go, yeah, that's true, but I want to look at how he builds up his credibility. So one way that Martin Luther King Jr. attempts to persuade his audience is by becoming a credible, believable person. And he does this in a variety of ways. Example number 1, example number 2, example number 3, example number 4. And so, yeah, there's a lot of other things going on, but your analysis is focused on one big idea. Give me many examples of that big idea. Discuss it thoroughly. You're done. All right, so that's the analysis. So in sections 1 and 2, in the summary and the analysis, there's no I point of view. You don't give an I, it's not about personal. It's not anything personal. You don't give me your opinion. You're just kind of reporting what's in there. The response section, the third section, is where you can say, loved it, hated it, confused, complicated, whatever. You explain your own personal reaction. So in the response section, formally discuss your personal understanding of the essay, about a page. This is the least important section of the paper. Discuss how effective or relevant you think the essay ultimately is, and then end with the works cited in MLA format, and then give the final word count for the essay. This paper is due on April 5th, and we'll have the normal workshop and preparatory stuff ahead of time, and opportunity to kind of grab some more essays to choose from. So 3 sections, and really it's just an exercise in, can you objectively report what the writer said? Then can we analytically kind of pull apart their types of appeal and then respond to it and kind of separate those into different activities. Questions?
Is this our final paper?
Nope, we have one more after this.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, we've still got some weeks left on this semester. And I'm
It's
like,
so nice outside. Come on.
it'll snow in April. You know it will.
It's supposed to snow on Saturday.
Is it really? Yeah, I want to be surprised, but it's Idaho. We're in the mountains. Yeah, we've got until May before things are over, so we've got plenty of time left in the semester. You're doing great though. Keep coming to class, keep working. You're doing great. All right, if there's no other questions, we're done for the day. Thank you for your participation. Have a great weekend. Don't forget, we do have online writing assignments this week. Last week we had a break. Now we're back into it. So keep going, keep writing, keep working. See you later, folks at home. Thanks for your participation.